Hello and welcome back to the Joe and Toby Talk podcast, where we talk a variety of different topics from the world of sport, music, television, film, basically anything that we like, really. And the last couple of weeks have been a little bit different. We've went off-piste. We had a big discussion about the worlds of James Bond and video games. And, we're back into slightly more normal territory. I wouldn't necessarily say familiar territory, Toby. I think we're probably more familiar with the James Bond franchise than the world of cricket right now. But there's a certain thing called the Ashes starting next week, and we will be doing our best to preview it and give our thoughts on it as, casual to intermediate cricket fans. I used to be a massive fan of cricket. I've got not a lot of cricket knowledge, but not necessarily have watched every ball of the last few years. I know you're in a very similar position, Toby, and I think we're going through a bit of a transitional phase with the England side, so some newer faces are in the squad, and we'll be trying our best to sort of go into that today. So, yeah, welcome along, Toby. How are you doing? Have you got anything to update us about from your last week of life?
No, don't think so. I mean, this evening that we're recording this on the Saturday, you've got the 24 Hours of Le Mans, Champions League final, and we're sat here recording a podcast. If that's
the hottest day of the year so far.
Is it?
I think so.
I haven't seen evidence. It's only been about 25 here. I'm sure we had a hotter day earlier, but yeah, I guess it could be in some areas.
Yeah. I know we're due a heat wave this weekend, so I know a lot of people are getting very excited.
As they do in this country, as soon as it gets over 20 degrees, exactly. The t-shirts are all off and the beer's out and the barbecues are on.
Yeah, and you partake in none of that. None of that nonsense, Toby, eh?
Well, whether it's minus 10 or 30 degrees, my life doesn't change.
And on that note, let's talk about something that will hopefully change this summer, and that is England's form against Australia, because it's fair to say it has been a long time since those glory years of, I would say, the 2009, 2010-11 series, and then following that up in 2013. Those three Ashes series were probably the peak of English cricket. And now we talk a lot about that Test side. The likes of James Anderson, who's still about. You had Andrew Strauss and Alistair Cook opening the batting. You had the likes of Ian Bell, Peterson, Paul Collingwood, Andrew Flintoff, Stuart Broad, who's still knocking about. Graham Swan was your spinner, Matt Pryor. These names, I don't think many of the England's current side would get into that side. Back then, that really was an all-time classic side, and since then we've obviously had some whitewashes. Famously in 2014-15, or was it 13-14? I think it was that 5-0. Yeah, 5-0. That's seen the end of the likes of Graham Swan and Kevin Peterson as England players, and then more recently in what was it, 2021, was it? I'm struggling with dates. Yeah, it feels so recent, but
it does. You're right.
4-0 that one was, wasn't it? And obviously England trying to get the Ashes back for the first time in quite a few years, and it feels very much like 2005 to me. We're going into this series with a lot of hype, a lot of positive form, positive results, and I think a genuine belief that this could be our series. And I think that's the first Ashes series we can really say that for since 2015, really. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on the whole hype around England at the moment?
It's all right. I just muted myself because I was clearly dying after having my cup of tea. Poisoned myself. It's the first time. I mean, you've got to remember, obviously, I'm a little bit younger than you, so
yeah.
Really, I can't remember in recent years. I should say 2015 was really the last one where we went into an Ashes series with some sort of positivity. I remember vaguely more England going to Australia, because unfortunately those are the periods where we got absolutely slaughtered. The 2013 series, as you say, I remember that particularly for Graham Swan going. The most recent whitewash was, well, call it a white. It was 4-0, so basically still was, even though the fifth test was a draw. That was embarrassing, really, and really led to a change which has been quite incredible in the captaincy of this man, Ben Stokes. And
Props. Here we
props.
go.
I don't know if you noticed at the start, I quickly got it off the bookshelf, thought I've got to have at least one prop. I'd got a Stuart Broad book in the wardrobe, but I'm not walking over there now.
You know what? I've got the best prop possible in the background. I've got the actual Ashes urn sat over my left shoulder. I don't think you can beat that one.
The Ashes urn. Is Ben Stokes coming up next week?
It's from Lords. It's from Lords, so I can only assume it is the real thing.
And they use a replica now, don't they? Because you've got the real thing.
Exactly. Cool. For my contribution to the world of cricket video games, yes. I was even though I've never won the Ashes, I don't think in a series, they gave me the trophy a bit like they gave Stephen Hendry the Masters trophy after winning it 5 times in a row. That's how it all happened. But you know, I think it has been quite incredible. You know, Joe Root was sort of groomed for that captaincy role for many years. You know, he was seen as the person that will lead England for a long time, and I think he has actually captained the most Test matches, I believe.
That sounds right to me.
Certainly up there with Alistair Cook as well. You know, who did it a long time, and I have to say, you know, you look back on that time with Joe Root as a real time of hurt for English cricket. It was really quite pathetic, wasn't it? You know, it was collapse after collapse. It was the same old story. England would, you know, probably get a decent start and then 8 wickets for 32 runs or something silly like that. And you know, there was embarrassing defeat after embarrassing defeat. And this was all in the red ball game. Of course, in the white ball game, we had a big restructuring of that, you know, circa 2015, 2016. And we really turned that around. And obviously, the peak of that was winning the World Cup, 50 over World Cup in 2019. Of course, there's controversial circumstances around that, but nobody can take away the fact that England were the best team that tournament and deserved to win it in the end. Obviously, they've retained their 2020 crown as well, and you know, they are a force to be reckoned with in the limited overs world. But it was the red ball cricket that kept, you know, coming back to bite them. And I think they'd never found a replacement for Graham Swan, particularly. They'd never found somebody that could step in for Jimmy Anderson if he wasn't playing. And other than Joe Root, there was never really anybody that was scoring consistent runs. You know, we had opener after opener. It was it was quite hilarious, really, wasn't it? You know, it was like a revolving door almost of a different opener every week. It really was panic stations, wasn't it? It was a bit like Leeds United's management this season.
Or Watford.
Or Watford, yeah. It was exactly like that. And you know, that wasn't that long ago. You know, this 4-0 defeat to Australia was 2021, and Joe Root didn't resign until early 22 when we lost against the West Indies, of course. So it's been quite the turnaround in the last year, and I think it is very reminiscent of how we approached the limited overs model. And I think we had some massive success in that by being aggressive and by going for our shots. Obviously, in limited overs, that is sort of the name of the game, but we were scoring some incredible, high totals in the limited over game. Quite often we'd go over 400 in the one days, which until about 5-6 years ago was never really done. And we've sort of taken that model and we've brought it into Test cricket, which has taken the world by storm. And you'll probably hate this. It's quoted as BazBall, and it's sort of the naughty snooker of cricket, isn't it? What are your opinions on it? I've never really talked to you about how you feel about how England play now, but I absolutely love it.
I think going back to your earlier point, I never thought Joe Root himself was the problem with the captaincy. And I know a lot of people said that having the captaincy changed Joe Root's game. His game wasn't as good. Looking at the stats, that's not the case, because Joe Root was always one of the leading scorers.
Yeah.
I think it's very reminiscent to football management in that cricket, football, all sport is a confidence game. And I think some of the coaching, the players just weren't positive in their attitudes. And as you say, with this revolving door of openers, you've got a situation where there was too much loyalty shown to some players. Keaton Jennings somehow got in the team for test match upon test match. Then we had Dom Sibley, who I think could only score a half century if he played for 2 days, with his one shots on the leg side. And we went through so many openers. As you say, it became a bit of a laughing stock in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your Watford analogy was brilliant, actually. I think we would honestly struggle to name every single opener that was tried in that position.
Oh, I'd have a go.
Yeah. I think there'll probably be a Sporkle quiz out there somewhere with all of these openers. And if not, I'm imploring the people, the listeners of this podcast, to go and make one, because it was comical. And I remember, I'm going to mention a game that we've both mentioned before on this channel, the cricket captain. And every year, I would get the new cricket captain, and my series is the Road to World Number 1, which is getting harder every year because England are getting further and further away from World Number 1. However, a player I always used to pick, and you'll know this well, Toby, is a certain Ben Duckett. And I always used to pick him, and I feel like had we stuck with him years ago, we might not be in the mess, or might not have got into the mess that we were in, because I think he's been terrific. He's been one of our standout performers over the last 12 months, in my opinion. And obviously, Zach Crawley, he's somebody that gets a lot of stick, actually, Zach Crawley. But it's fair to say he's been a consistent performer. Now, whether that be consistent in Joe Root's mould of 50s and 100s all the time, which would be fantastic if he was. But he does go out there and he does smack 20, 30, 40 runs quite frequently and get our innings off to a good start. And it quite often now, we tend to get to 80 or 100 before we lose our first wicket, which, if you'd said that 18 months ago, I think we'd have snapped your hand off for it, wouldn't we? So
no, you're not wrong there. Definitely not, no.
So I think we've stumbled across the correct opening partnership that works for us and the way we play. Ollie Pope now plays at 3. I think that's a good move. Obviously, Ian Bell used to play there for absolutely donkey's years, and then Jonathan Trott came in and he played there as well. And then once Trotty went, it was back to Ian Bell's job for a little bit. But I actually think Ollie Pope, I don't know what your opinion is of this, but I think Ollie Pope looks a little bit like Ian Bell. It's quite a resemblance.
That's quite a statement. Not quite sure myself about that, but I mean, looking at Pope's average, averaging 50 over the last year in 21 innings, he's been solid and has looked like a solid player. But again, he was one of those when he first came in that was, I think, was at 5 or 6 and was a bit scattergun like the rest of them. Was capable of a good score. Josh Butler, Jason Roy, Josh Butler and Johnny Bairstow even were always capable of a good score, and on the odd occasion it would happen. Ben Stokes even included, and then it wouldn't happen most of the time, and that was the infuriation. And the problem that these players had, as you mentioned, is what you ended up with was the 18 for free scenario that we saw so many times. Yeah. Root had to come in and shore the innings up. If Root didn't do that, then these middle order batsmen, who usually are used to having, not necessarily just having a smack at it, but normally not those that would be expected to last a day, say at the crease. And those players were expected to do the jobs of those beforehand. So I think having those players at the top of the order now, who can stay there and provide some good footing, I think it all works out.
Yeah.
As you say there, the way England play, at first I was a bit sceptical because I know exactly what's happened before with all these collapses. In that, if one or two go, the rest get a bit shaky. But so far, I can't really say that because the results have been so good. If you look at the World Test Championship, which unfortunately did count those 4 matches that we lost against Australia. If you look at the record since then, has been pretty strong. I just to that Test Championship on Wikipedia. So in the 22 matches they've played, they've lost 8. 4 of those being the Australia matches. So if you take a sample of 18, they've won 10 out of 18 and drawn 4 of those. So it's not a bad record whatsoever. And I know they've played New Zealand in that time. Who
Pakistan I think New Zealand were might have been the world #1 Test side at that point. I know they played India in last year's World Test Championship final. So, they're no slouch. Obviously, South Africa has been the end of many a England captain's career. So, I think those are 2 very good series to sort of base yourself upon. Obviously, a Test match against Ireland isn't exactly what we rest all our hopes on. But you might remember last time Australia toured England, Toby, and that was 2019.
I remember this very well. The Jack Leach story.
And I mean, Ireland bowled us out for, was it 83 or something?
85.
85. And I mean, that was classic England. That was their first ever Test match, I believe, Ireland. And they bowled us out for 85. I believe we got them back in the 4th innings and bowled them out for 38 or something bonkers like that. But we've come a long way since then, I think. It's fair to say. And even that series, did we lose 2-1 or draw 2-2, something like that?
The Ashes series.
Yeah.
2 each. I honestly don't know how we got to it. I mean, that was
Ben Stokes' heroics at Headingley, wasn't it?
And Jack Leach's 1.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah, don't forget that. But I mean, that series was pretty exciting.
It was tremendous. It was for me. It was just a perfect summer of cricket. For me, the best cricket that I remember, because you had the 50 over championship World Cup that came before that, and I think that I might be talking a little bit too highly of this, but I think that did attract new people to the world of cricket. I felt like there was more of a spotlight on cricket.
Yeah, and I think it helped. It helped the World Cup final was on free to air. It was on Channel 4, wasn't it? So
yeah, and that game was tremendous. You couldn't have written that. And then
It was like Abu Dhabi 21, wasn't it? Really?
Well, yeah, maybe not quite. And then you had the third test at Headingley that Stokes masterminded, and if it wasn't for Ben Stokes and Jack Leach, I don't know what they'd have done. But just the excitement of that 2019 summer was tremendous, which is why this is such a good book on Ben Stokes' summer to remember of 2019, because he was the main man. There's nothing questioning that. But I did worry when he became captain that it would be almost a bit kamikaze, because I've watched Stokes before and I thought, you stupid idiot, what you playing that shot for? And he's got a silly shot in him. For every 9 brilliant shots he plays, you think, why are you doing that when you're on 5 or 10? So I worried about that. And, watching him in a couple of innings, even since he's been the captain, he's still got that in him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
but luckily, I do wonder
luckily, when Stokes comes in now, we're not 72 for 5, and that I think that helps and actually takes a bit of pressure off him, so that if he does have a dodgy innings, it doesn't really matter so much.
Yeah, that's true. But, that's true. I think maybe the appointment of McCullum, as you said before, was potentially grounded him. Obviously, they go in the same way, the way they want to play, but I think that would have played a good part. Rob Key coming in as the director of cricket as well. I think there was some big management issues behind the scenes, the coaching and the management. That's been well documented. And I remember it was really ironic because it was just before the West Indies series, the start of 22, and I was watching and again, I was really interested at this point because they'd been battered by Australia, and there was Nasser Hussain, Mike Atherton, and Rob Key on a Sky Sports podcast on how to fix cricket in England cricket, and lo and behold, 2 weeks later, Rob Key's named as the director of cricket, and you think, wow, this is
best
really
job
changed.
interview, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And I thought, God, this could go really wrong for Rob Key because he'd never done anything like it in the past. But as for Stokes and Key and McCullum and everybody behind it, it seems to have gone well so far. But I do want to raise an air of caution about this Ashes series because everybody goes into it thinking, it'll be great. The Ashes are a little bit like a local derby in football, in that results beforehand don't really matter.
Out the window, 100%.
Yeah, it's a completely different ball game. I don't know how to call it. I think it's going to be really close, which is a positive because previously, even though we won the 15 series, it's fair to say in 19 we were very lucky to draw that series 2 each.
I mean, it felt like a victory to draw that 2-2, which is not what we just said in the past. I mean, we've never, other than 2013, did we beat them 3-0 in 2013? I think it was. I feel like we've never had a convincing victory over Australia. We've never done a 5-0, and I think it would be awesome if we could do that. But I agree with you. I'm not sure that will happen. It always seems to be done the hard way with England. So
yeah, I don't think it ever should happen where it's 4-0 or 5-0. I think that's more of a shame because you get to a point where the two teams should be fairly equally matched. And unfortunately, as you say, in recent years, it's been England that have been the sufferers of this. But
yeah.
I, in some ways, I wouldn't want to go and beat Australia 4 or 5-0 because it puts a bit of a dampener on things, I think winning it maybe 4-1, 3-2, A, makes it obviously a lot more exciting, but B, makes it feel a lot more worth it because if you go and batter Australia and Australia aren't very good, it's the same old token for me that you've got to work for it. And although I think England have been good, you look at Australia, they're in the World Test Championship final. Looks like they could win that. So that's a pretty high accolade against India, who are the second best Test team in the world, if you read into that World Test Championship. But I think there will be hardships that come under this captaincy. I don't think it's going to be all lovely for all amount of time. And I just hope that maybe if they lose the first test, let's say, that we don't have the typical media reaction that, oh, well, England, here we are again, England have lost, blah, 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 blah. And I hope we don't get that, but we'll see. But I do fear that maybe there's a little bit of overconfidence going in, which, trust me, is a lot better than going into it thinking, oh, God, we're going to be battered. But
well, it's a bit like the England football situation, isn't it? I think
you know my feelings on England football.
yeah. Absolutely, and I think the big question mark will be is Ben Stokes fit, and he's had his fair share of injury troubles over the years, and him and Andrew Flintoff, their careers are so synchronized, if you like, with such flair, such brilliance, talisman of England, a little bit crazy perhaps, and injury problems, and I think Ben Stokes is persevering through a lot of pain at the moment, and 5 Ashes tests are going to be the ultimate test, pardon the pun, for him and his body, and what he's able to bring to England. We've seen many times him hobbling but scoring 82 or something out in the middle. And I wouldn't put it past him to be doing that. But equally, he's got to look after himself as well, because he's not getting any younger. And obviously, the older he gets, the harder it's going to become to overcome these injuries. And if he does some serious damage, then he could be out for a significant period of time. So that would be my big question mark for this series, is if Ben Stokes pushes himself to the point where he can't play anymore, then replacing him is going to be very, very difficult. I don't think there's another player like Ben Stokes to just draft into the side. I know people have talked about Sam Curran a little bit, but as good as Sam Curran is, I don't think he's on the same level as Ben Stokes. So that would be my only question mark going into the series. Looking at the squad as a whole, though, you've obviously got your classic names in there: Jimmy Anderson, Stuart Broad. Anderson's expected to be fit for the first Test match. He was rested against Ireland, and Stuart Broad had a good match against Ireland and has a terrific record against Australia. So, not many people are talking about them playing in the same side in the first Test. But would you be putting them two as your first 2 names on the team sheet? Because I know I would.
110%. I mean, there's no doubt about it. If you're gonna go out and win, there's no doubt that you've got to put those 2 in your side. There's obviously a question about the batting, but 10 or 11, who cares?
Yeah.
I think you look at the other bowlers, and if you're going for somebody to partner one or the other, obviously there's nobody who matches in terms of the history, but equally I don't think there's anybody who matches in terms of the current ability. You've got Stuart Broad, who I think is still excellent. Jimmy Anderson, a little bit older, and fitness struggling a little bit. But I think that Jimmy is still almost just transcends time. Almost, it's incredible how the longevity of those 2 have been, and I just think to not play those 2 in the same side, whether if it's a case that maybe Anderson can only play, say, 3 or 5 tests, I think you've got to play him from the start, the first Test, because, as I've said before, a good start is absolutely key. I think if they go and lose the first Test, it might be panic stations, but I think you've got to start well and even risk that lineup for that second Test, I think. Because if you can then go 2-0 in front, it provides a little bit of a buffer to then bring a Chris Wokes or even a Matt Potts in to partner Broad.
Yeah.
But I think for that particularly that first Test, to leave either one of those out would be a big mistake, and to be fair, a big sigh of relief, I would say, for Australia.
I agree. I mean, James Anderson is the best fast bowler of all time. It's probably going to be his last home Ashes series, I would imagine. I mean, I've been saying that since 2015, so it's surely not, though. Surely he can't take it to 2027, but he might try, who knows. But I think he's a player, when he's used well, I think he can he will get you wickets. You know, he's not going to be a player that turns up and gets 0 for 105. You know, that's not going to happen with Anderson. So I would expect him to play no matter what. Stuart Broad's a question mark, obviously. I mean, they've got a combined age of about 80 between them, but Anderson reminds me a lot of Roger Federer, actually, in terms of his longevity, and I think it's because they're so graceful on a cricket pitch, you know, so smooth, and, you know, Anderson just, it's the same action every single time, and it just looks effortless for him. And I think that's a massive thing for him to be playing for as long as he has done, into his 40s, and well, we'll see whether this is his last Ashes Test series. Would you tip him to retire if we won with him in the side?
Well, it's difficult to say, but I mean, this surely has got to be his last home series. You're quite right about Federer and the similarities between the two there. It would be incredible if he went on for another 4 years before the next home series. I mean, I'm just looking. He's how old is Anderson now? Anderson is 40.
Yeah.
For him to be 44, I mean, he'll actually be 41 at the end of the series. Yeah. So for him to be nigh on 45,
yeah. And Broad will be in his 40s by then as well, and you know, surely that era will have gone. The other, I would say, must pick for this series, Ollie Robinson. I know he's a player that's sort of come out of nowhere over the last few years into the international fold, and he's been really, really good. But again, it's the injuries that worry me about Ollie Robinson. Mark Wood's very similar as well, injury problems, and you know, you look at that squad, it's very bowler heavy, I think, and I think that brings about the options to rotate a little bit. Obviously, Josh Tongue played against Ireland, did okay. I wasn't, you know, massively impressed with him. He didn't set the world alight. You know, Matthew Potts, very similar, had an excellent series, excellent summer last year, actually, but whether he gets in ahead of Broad and Anderson, you know, is anybody's guess. Obviously, the big talking point before the series has even begun has been Jack Leach, and he's actually been the only ever-present player of the BazBall era so far, and has massively improved his average. He's got a lot more Test wickets to his name, but of course, last time we played Australia, he got absolutely battered around the ground, and I think people were very intrigued to see how Jack Leach got on in this series. We'll never know now. He's out for the series, and returning as a player who, again, I'm not sure ever really set the world alight in the Test cricket world. I don't doubt that he's an okay spin option and can bat, and I guess matches the philosophy, but equally hasn't played red ball cricket for a good few years now, and in his last 10 Test matches, I think he averaged 11 with the bat. So yeah, Moeen Ali. I don't know. Have you ever been the biggest fan of Moeen Ali?
I think the key is that Moeen Ali for me is an all rounder.
Yeah,
not a spinner as such. And if you need a spinner, which you do, you can't just rely on pace. To have somebody that, and obviously they've been forced into this, to bring somebody who is not known necessarily for his bowling, I don't think, more as an all-rounder, is a bit of a concern. I'm not the biggest fan of Adil Rashid, but ultimately Adil Rashid is a spinner by trade, albeit his batting isn't the best. But it does make you wonder
and he's very much a limited overs player, isn't he?
Yeah. But if you were going to bring a spinner, Rashid could have been the option there.
Yeah,
for me.
I mean that there's lots of different names that were put about. I know Will Jacks, I think, played a few times last year. There's Matt Parkinson as well, who I know played quite a bit a couple of years ago. Dom Bess is somebody else. Your younger talents, if you like, with the ball. I think there's a spinner called Rafika as well. He maybe played last summer.
And Joe, besides, you've got Joe Root as well, who's not obviously a permanent spinner, but as a part-time spinner does a job.
And I think very much in the mould of a Michael Vaughan and a Kevin Peterson, that an off spinner that gets wickets, but is primarily there for their batting. And Joe Root, I think, is very underrated in the spin bowling department. He's had fifers. He's definitely somebody that I think will get key wickets in this Australia series. I think Joe Root's bowling is actually going to be a key element of how we play, because we're going to need to have a spinner holding an end while we're rotating. The likes of Anderson, the likes of Broad, Ollie Robinson, Ben Stokes potentially having a ball. So yeah, the spinner's going to be key. My question to you, Toby, is: do you think Moeen Ali will play in the first Test match?
For them to bring him in, it's almost like, not that they have to, but the design is there. If you look at the 11, let's model that 11 for the first Test match. Obviously, I think we're both going to agree that you're going to have Crawley and Duckett 1 and 2.
Yeah. And you're going to have Pope at 3.
Pope at 3, Root at 5. 4. Sorry, 4. See, I'm not a maths teacher, I can't count. Obviously, Stokesy's going to be in there.
You know what, Toby? We were doing well blagging that we knew something about cricket until that very moment.
And they've all switched off. So you've got Ben Stokes, obviously Bairstow, that's 6. To make things easier, you then put Jimmy Anderson and Broad 10 or 11. So you're then left with 3. 7, 8 and 9. Of that, you're probably going to take one more fast bowler, aren't you? So you're probably going to choose out of Robinson, Wokes or Wood.
Potts.
Insert name there. And then I guess maybe they might put one of Brook or Lawrence in, I guess, as a kind of another batting option. And then I feel like Ali slots in at number 8. I think that makes sense, unless they want to take another fast bowler. But really, with Anderson, Broad, a third pace bowler, and Stokes as a part-time, because Stokes isn't a full-time bowler for me.
No. And I don't think he needs to be. You know.
But I think with having 3 quick bowlers and Stokes as a part-timer, there's no need for another fast bowler. So with the 10 we've picked, there's definitely enough room for Ali in there. What concerns me with Ali is actually his batting, because as you allude to, his average is bleak. And Ali is one of those I always found that almost played when he wanted to. He was actually very good, ironically. If you picked him as an opener, he'd play as an opener. If you picked him as a number 8, he'd play as a number 8. The trouble was, you never got that sort of mix between the two. And that's why he ended up with that low average. He'd come in at a point, again, this like 100 for 7 point or whatever, have a couple of smacks at it, and be out for a 10 or 15. So, although Ali's a decent bat, I don't think he's up there with, thinking about some of the great players, that the Matt Pryors of this world, for example, who would be in that a sort of similar spot and produce the goods from a batting perspective. So again, it does make me question why they've brought Ali back, because again, the spinning, he's had some really good innings. He's had a couple of fifers, I remember. So it all depends how well he bowls, because that's the main thing he's going to bring to the side, rather than his batting. But to answer your original question, I'd be shocked if they don't pick him for the first Test. Well, put it this way, if they pick both Anderson and Broad, I'd be shocked if they didn't pick him. But ultimately, I guess if it's only one of the two, they might not pick him, because ultimately they might need a 4th fast bowler. Yeah. Because effectively you need 2 of Jimmy Anderson to make up for what he's going to do.
I think, honestly, if they're picking more than 3 seamers, Chris Wokes has to be one of them, because Chris Wilkes can bat.
Oh yeah.
You know, if you're putting in Potts, Robinson, Broad, and Anderson, then that's a very long tail. You know, I think in this day and age, if your tail starts at 8, then that's a very, very poor batting lineup. And we might get away with it because of how well our top order have generally been doing, but I think that would be a very, very dangerous selection for me if you went with that. So yeah, I agree with you. I think Ali will play just because of all the hype around it. I think it would make a bit of a mockery of it if he didn't. I think he will slot in at 8. I think if I had to guess what the selection will be, I reckon Robinson, Anderson, and Broad will play the first Test match if they're all fit, and I think possibly Brooke will be the other player that comes in over Lawrence, or potentially they go Chris Wilkes. If they don't think Stokes is going to bowl, they might bring Chris Wilkes in instead. That would be my only thought. And of course, this is the squad for the first 2 Ashes tests. There is scope for change for 3, 4, and 5 if somebody does get injured or something does go wrong.
Bring back Jennings.
I mean, there was some people talking about that. Believe it or not, there were
some people believe it.
Saying that. But taking our attention slightly away from England just for a little while. Obviously, there are 2 teams in the Ashes series, and of course, Australia. I mean, they have been good at Test cricket since cricket began. Really, they've never dropped off to the point we have. Put it that way. They've not had their really low years like the West Indies, for instance. They always seem to have a decent Test side. They're very strong at home always. So, but they're always a little bit vulnerable away from home, especially in England. I think with the swinging conditions and a bit of cloud, they can sometimes struggle, particularly on that first morning. So this heat wave that's about to come is probably going to do the Australians the world of good. But I'm looking at some of the names in their Test squad. Obviously, Pat Cummins is the captain. Steve Smith still knocking about as the vice captain. Just missed a century, really. You've got the likes of Nathan Lyon, who I can't believe is still playing. He's still in there. You've got Mitchell Marsh, Josh Hazlewood, lots of familiar names, and of course the likes of Mitchell Starc and David Warner, who have really got under England's skin in the past, and I think it will be very interesting to see Broad versus Warner on that first day, because Broad over the years, I think he's got him out 14 times, which is surely got to be up there with some of the best records ever, player versus player. So that's going to be interesting. But can you believe how consistent that Australia team have been in terms of who is in there for so many years? And yet,
you're right.
They're all still at the top of their game, with the exception of maybe David Warner. I know he is somebody that's come under a lot of criticism recently. And I think he's a sort of half announced his retirement for the summer of next year, for Australia's summer, I guess. So he wants to play on until the new year. But yeah, do you have any particular memories of some of the Australia side, and are there anybody that you're looking forward to seeing this summer?
Well, ironically, one of the only names that has pushed his way in the squad in recent years is Marnus Labuschagne, and that was purely because of the whole Steve Smith, Cameron Bancroft, and David Warner incident.
Oh yeah,
and Labuschagne and Smith is a bit scary for me, because those are 2 players that you can quite conceivably make in a partnership of 300 or 400, and apart from Root and Stokes, there's nobody else in that England team that I think come close. I think without doubt those 2 are the real danger. But obviously, you've got the likes of Warner who can still do a job. The bowling attack's so impressive as well, isn't it? The seam attack: Cummins, Hazelwood, Stark, and then
I mean, they are, for want of a better word, are Broad and Anderson. They're not like not like the old days of Glenn McGrath, Shane Warne. But these guys have been in for so long. I mean, some of them might have even been in Ashes 2009. I can't remember fully because these guys just seem to transcend aging. But
I feel like Stark and Cummins was surely.
Yeah, I just feel like I remember them in one of the Codemasters games, but yeah, I mean that's how long these guys have been knocking about. But we always talked about Jimmy Anderson. His first test was 20 years ago. Stuart Broad was playing in the late 2000s. So yeah, Nathan Lyon must be about 96 now, but is still playing in the Ashes. And I tell you what, Nathan Lyon has been a massive problem for us over the years. He is the Australia's Graham Swan, I would say. And hopefully we'll see the back of him after this series. But I just think it's going to be a real interesting battle between the very experienced Australia side and a fairly transitional England side. I think that dynamic is going to be a really interesting talking point of this Ashes series to see how it's going to transpire. You've got some real experience in the England team with Root and Stokes, of course, Anderson, Broad. But other than that, most of them are still under 30 test matches. Whereas I would hazard a guess that a lot of the Australian players are knocking on 100, if not past that 100 test mark. And do you think if it gets close in this Ashes series, that could make all the difference?
It could do. There's an element here that I think England could find themselves quite humbled. Steve Smith come out with the fighting talk that the only reason that BazBall has done so well is because they haven't faced us yet. And there's an interesting element to that. That I feel like, as I've said, I think all the hype's on England. Australia are quite understated going into this, and I think that could help Australia, particularly with the experience they've got. Some of these England players playing in their first Ashes series, and as you say, some inexperience in there. And I think that England going into this series, particularly without an experienced opener. I mean, Crawley is an experienced opener, but not in the way that you would say or mean experienced. I think that could hurt England, and having Pope at number 3 could, as I say, could hurt England, and I think could place quite a stress on Joe Root to produce the goods. My role in life is to be pessimistic, so maybe I might be being too pessimistic, and it'll all come good. But as I say, I think such the excitement is the intrigue of that first test, and I think after the first test, we'll know a lot more about what to expect. I think that there are so many avenues this could go down. That's the beauty of it going in, isn't it, really? That we don't know what's going to happen. We could predict it for all the world, but what I think we do know, hopefully, is that it won't be a complete thrashing either way. I feel like it's going to be close. I genuinely do feel that, and I think that I feel like if there is a side that starts badly, I feel like that side will grow into the series as time goes on, particularly if that side is Australia. England, if they start badly, I'm not so sure, but I think that, again, a big part of that is team selection, as we've discussed with Anderson and Broad. But it does make a very interesting dynamic, no question. And again, to go back to the original question, I think that as we go through the series, if England do start to struggle with some of those more experienced players feeling the pain, fitness-wise, Australia's experience might well come to fruition, definitely.
I think what's going to be really interesting is actually how closely packed the Ashes tests are. So we've got the first test at Edgbaston. Obviously now it's no longer tradition for Lords to open up an Ashes series, which I don't really know why they've changed that, but it's the second test now. I think it's been that since 2009. So the first test is on the 16th of June, and then the second test is the 28th of June. So there's a little bit of a gap between those. But then as the second test finishes on the 2nd of July, you've then got the third test at Headingley on the 6th of July. So there's only actually 3 full days between those. And then a little bit of a gap to the 4th. At Old Trafford, and then again there's only a 3-day gap between the 4th and 5th test at the Oval, and of course Australia have had a bit of a dummy run at playing at the Oval this week against India in the World Test Championship, so that again could be a little bit of a difference if it's 2-2 going down to the Oval, and Australia have played there this summer already. They know how they'll want to play, they'll know their game plan. So again, I think that could be an interesting dynamic to explore. But yeah, I think that's where those players are going to really struggle. The likes of Anderson and Broad and Stokes in their fitness, and I guess Ali, because he hasn't played any Test cricket for a long time, so it's very unlikely he's going to play all 5. And it's going to be those tight turnaround matches that they're going to struggle with, and I think that could potentially make the difference at the end of the day. I think possibly Australia have got a little bit more depth to call on than we do with their very best players, that is. And but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Do you have any sort of, not final thoughts, but any more thoughts to throw into the ring about the Test series in general?
I think it's a great thing purely for us lot who have lost the main sports. Obviously, football season's finished. The F1 season, although very much still going, is finished in terms of any championship excitement. We've got no snooker, and it's great when cricket comes to the fore when there's not much else going on, and gives us a lot of excitement. So I'm glad about that more than anything. If England win or lose, hey, it's still going to be enjoyable in some part. But as I say, I think from our preview, I think we've really discussed all we can, because there are so many things that can happen that we just won't know until the first, if not end of the second test, what way it's going to go. And it's so hard to judge how some of these inexperienced players are going to cope. And I mean, in fairness, the BazBall era has kind of just gone above any sort of expectation so far. So maybe the Ashes series will. But as I said, I think people know my opinion that there could be a bit of a humbling involved. But I don't know. Let's see.
I mean, put it this way: we know England are going to try and win it. They're not going to go in with any fear. I don't think there'll be any point that they try and defend. I think they will always try and play positively and look to get results in these 5 matches. So I'm looking forward to it. I think, should it be as exciting as we're expecting it to be, I think it could be a moment that inspires another generation of cricket fans. I think it's quite telling, really, that it's the 50-over World Cup and an Ashes series that have the capability of doing that, rather than these new ideas of the 100 and 2020 blasts and IPLs and this, that, and the other.
That's a good point to bring up, actually, just sorry to interrupt. I think that there's actually quite a lot of pressure on this series because Test cricket is inevitably being overshadowed by the limited over stuff, and understandably, the younger fans, like everything, won't go into it too much, but lower attention span and all these things, inevitably are going to be more excited by the limited formats. But as you say quite correctly, if this turns out to be a great Ashes series, it could well reignite Test cricket again.
I think it could, and especially with how entertaining England's players been. I think if England entertain and play well and make it a contest, I think it really will be a hell of a series. The only thing I'm gutted about is that it's not free to air. I think that is a massive missed opportunity for me. I think it needs to be protected in the same way that Wimbledon and The British Grand Prix are, I think,
Yeah,
particularly,
yeah,
if there was a deciding Ashes test, I think that would need to be on Channel 4 or BBC. And I think it's such a shame that we don't have test matches on free to air anymore.
it is, but I think that, and Channel 5 did a good job. It's now on BBC today at the test. They do a really good job with that. And,
Yeah.
when I've been at work and that's the main thing I've used to watch the test matches.
Yeah.
It still provides a good context to the situation. And I think, to be truthful, that's what most people will consume, I will say. Whether
I just remember it in 2005. Yeah, that was the last year it was free to air, and that really built up a massive following in the country. I think everybody got behind them, and a little bit like at a Football World Cup or something. I don't believe there would be hype around England football teams if it was on Sky and we were just watching Match of the Day. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying. I think Channel 5's coverage was exemplary. I'm not so sure about BBC's coverage for once. It's still very good. I just don't think it's at the same level as Channel 5's was, with Mark Nichols presenting and Jeffrey Boycott in there, and he's a big miss, I think. Just like Bumble is on Sky, and Ian Botham, David Gower. A lot of the old guard are going, and I guess they're the JV and Dennis of those worlds, aren't they, really? And they've been forced out.
Is Mel Jones coming back?
Oh, I'm sure she will be. I'm sure she will. But I'm going to put you on the spot here, Toby. What's your score prediction, and to whom?
3-2 Australia.
Okay. I'm going to go 3-1 England.
Yay!
3-1 England. I think it's going to be a close start, but I think once England get into it, I think that they'll pull away, and there's surely going to be a weather-affected match in there somewhere. So, yeah. But it's going to be an absolute cracker. Gets off and running on Friday, the 16th of June, so it will be all over Sky's channels. I'm hoping at some point they'll stick something on Sky Showcase or make an agreement with Channel 4 or BBC to show at least a day of Ashes cricket. I think that would be awesome if they could do that. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting summer. So do let us know in the comments to this video what your score prediction is. Anything that you think we've missed, anything that you think we've said that is complete rubbish, which is probably all of it. We don't know anything, and hopefully we'll get some news about the new cricket game, Cricket 24, coming out soon, I assume, ready for the Ashes. And of course, well, if you can't wait for that, then also coming out next week, Toby, is our yearly instalment of Cricket Captain. Cricket Captain 2023, I believe, is out on the 13th of June, competing
Fantastic.
with F1 23, so I'm sure it'll come out on top in the Battle of the Sports, up against the might of EA, but we will see. It's like the Battle of the Bonds, isn't it? 1983.
Yeah, sure.
But no, thank you very much for listening to us. Make sure you leave a like if you have enjoyed, subscribe so that you don't miss any more Joe and Toby Talk podcasts, and we will see you on the next one. Goodbye.